Hello, Michelle. Welcome to the podcast. So nice to have you with me. I'm really glad we got connected by a mutual contact. It's always great to meet people. And to give our audience a little bit of a context about who you are, tell us a little bit about where you come from, what you're doing these days, and what's your career story.
Yeah. So, I have a really kind of odd one. I cover a lot of ground covered a lot of ground in my professional life. So, I started back in college as a theater and music major. So I went to law, went in there for law and came out with theater and music. So my parents were really excited. But after that, I did that for a good amount of time. I had an agent. I did a lot of singing, everything from, big, huge venues and baseball stadiums and stuff like that to, just shows and all sorts of really great things. But then, I always had a really good business sense too. So I wanted to combine, both kind of my right and left brain in that. So I went and got a master's in managing large nonprofits. So mainly around the arts so that I could sit there and talk to the business side of things, as well as understand the creativity. And then from there, I jumped in because I was bored. I jumped over into the tech realm. So I actually ended up working in tech for a little around a decade, managing teams like the PayPal Europe email marketing team in the operations field. And I got a ton of experience around business and startups and operations and all sorts of things in that realm. And then, our business unit got bought out. So at that point, I was without a job. So I decided at that point, I could easily have stepped right back into a six-figure, or it was the time to kind of do it on my own. So that's what I decided to do. And since then, it's been since 2016, I've been coaching and consulting for entrepreneurs and executives and all sorts of people, as well as right now I've got the podcast, The Resilient Entrepreneur, and I do a lot of speaking as well. So that is my story in a nutshell.
That's awesome. And I always appreciate a dynamic story. And I always find it interesting when people, especially with universities, when they go in to do something, come out with something completely different and then end up in a completely different field, but it's really nice because it seems that, I can imagine almost having that background in theater and then going into just managing people and public speaking and now podcasting. I'm sure all those skills you carry with you throughout. So I'm sure it's found to be useful to you in this case.
Yeah. I always look at it as kind of filling my collective tool belt. Like no matter what I'm learning or when I'm learning it, I like to kind of snowball it into something else, right? Everything is transferable in my mind. So whether or not I was to your point, managing a team in tech versus managing a team on an arts project, there's still people involved and there's still logistics, right? So it kind of all transfers over.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on your podcast, I'm curious a little bit about it because you discuss a lot of really interesting topics around resilient entrepreneurship, essentially. So talk to me about the topic. Why resilient entrepreneurship? What is it about resilience that interests you? Hey, you, thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to share it with friends and family who might find it interesting. Make sure to hit the subscribe button as well to stay up to date on weekly new videos that are going to be coming out with some awesome guests that I bring on. And if you have any questions, use the comment section to ask me questions, to interact. I look forward to talking to you. Interests you.
Yeah. So, part of my journey as well is that when I started my business, I did it alongside raising, I had two kids who were really medically complicated. So we were in and out of hospitals a lot with both of them. And I built my business alongside managing that. So when you talk about resilience, I feel like I've done a lot of homework in that realm, and whether or not it's from the financial perspective, or just managing family and managing all of these different priorities that are getting thrown at you on the rapid. So from that perspective, that is one aspect of where the resilient entrepreneur came from. But the other aspect is that I had to walk beside a lot of clients when the pandemic hit. And what I saw was there's lots of talk about how do we keep them open and the funding and the this and the that, but there wasn't much talk that I was seeing around their actual stories. And I think sometimes one of my really big passions is helping people feel a little less alone in their story. It's because every time I give a talk on something like resilience, or I tell my story, somebody inevitably comes up to me and says, I thought that was just me who felt that way, or I thought I was alone in feeling X, Y, and Z. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are feeling that because this level of stress, the, level of resilience that was needed to keep going was just at such an all-time high that that's kind of a part of where the resilient entrepreneur came from, because I wanted people to tell the hard stuff, talk about that part of it.
Mm. Yeah. And I love that. And I appreciate that so much, because I think that at least in the Middle East, like in Dubai, spending 8 years there, entrepreneurship is so romanticized, and it's such this trendy thing, and it's awesome thing that we can do. And it is devastating as much as it's rewarding, but it is equally as devastating and lonely. And, no matter how much people try to relate, you do feel super alone. And it's one of the hardest things, but so I very much appreciate. So that's really interesting, because I feel that not a lot of people bring in the stories. And I think that's an interesting twist, because I think that stories is what helps us connect as humans. And do you feel that has it gone better, our sharing, the connection that we have with one another? Or do you think that it has gotten worse over the last, 2-3 years?
That's hard. That's a hard question, man. Because I think the thing is that on so many levels, it's become online. I think we're the most connected we've ever been, right? But I think also without that ability to remember the person behind the screen, we're going to become less connected, right? So I think it depends on who you ask. I want to stay optimistic and think that because of the stuff that we're seeing in workplaces where humans are being a little bit more up the food chain rather than numbers, that maybe that level of connection is increasing. But it's extremely frustrating sometimes, to your point, with things romanticized or very much the social media culture, to judge what true connection looks like. So, but I'm going to stay on the optimistic side and hope that it's actually on the rise.
Yeah, I'll stay on that side with you as well. I call myself a realistic optimist, like I try to keep it real, but I try to look on the bright side of things as well. And having conversations like with individuals like yourself and hearing the work that you're doing helps me be more optimistic, because there are people that are trying to bring light to certain stories and situations in a world where we're more lonely than we have ever been statistically, where we have so many different mental health challenges. A lot of them are related to us feeling alone. And it's, that's a whole other story and discussion to have. But a part of being able to share your story, being the person sharing the story, and also being the person listening to the story, there's a great deal of vulnerability that comes into play. So what have you seen as why is it, but it's difficult to be vulnerable, because you don't know how you're going to be received. So what have you, what has been your experience with vulnerability and the stories that you've heard?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is yes, it's very hard to be vulnerable, but I think there's such a deeper level of connection that's made with the people that I interview or that I speak to, even just in networking or in business, where there is that shared sense of connection because there's a level of vulnerability. One of the questions that I ask straight up when someone applies for the podcast or gets given to me is, I will say, like, are you ready to tell the real stuff? Like, I don't want you coming on with the pitch. I don't want you coming on with kind of the really well-polished, PR spiel. I want to hear the person in the journey. I want to hear how it impacted you at, the core level. And if you aren't able to be vulnerable, I'm really bad at kind of that high level small talk. So if you're not able to kind of have that really raw conversation with me, it's probably going to not be a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's the deeper, the better, right? So when it comes to connection, because that's where it's at. Otherwise, it's just surface and it's generic, and that's not there. It's exhausting. It's exhausting because you're trying to like pull this information out of the person. I mean, I think it's just in every conversation. But there's a sense of fear that I assume, right? That comes with opening up. So what do you like? Let's say somebody wants to open up, but they fear. Is there a way to, take advantage of the fear in some way to manage? Like, how do you, what would you advise somebody?
Yeah. I mean, I think I work with a lot of women who feel exactly that way. Right. But the thing is also they have this flip side of the coin where they want to be able to serve others. Right. And I always like to frame that fear in the sense of like, what if one person hears you? Why don't you take the leap and put yourself out there? Because if one person hears you, the fear was worth it. And also fear is never going away. You and I both know that no matter what it is, whether it's, fear of starting a new company, fear of speaking, fear of telling your truth, whatever it is. I'm a big fan of maybe embracing it, but then choosing to do it anyway. Because once you have proven to yourself that you're able to kind of manage that fear, other things become easier too. And it's freeing once you can actually speak your truth in that realm. And I'm not saying like speak your truth in a way that hurts other people or is, crazy or anything like that. But I think we fracture ourselves. I think we break ourselves into pieces and then we don't kind of bring all of ourselves to the table, which that means people lose out sometimes.
And there's this notion that whenever you have this emotions that you're suppressing, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but this is kind of what I've been exploring lately. And there's a lot of hidden emotions that find a place inside our bodies and we carry it with us. And, a lot of heaviness comes with it, right? Like there's the expression of, it's like a rock off my shoulders. It talks a lot about those kind of emotions that we carry. And when we speak to somebody, then we feel like, I feel just lighter by sharing, right? Is that a thing that you believe that's?
Yes. I do. Because again, I think we are stronger with our sense of human connection, right? I think, again, if you are thinking that you are by yourself in something or you are alone, then there comes the shame, right? And shame can't live if you shine a light on it. So the minute that somebody speaks it, or kind of has that connection with somebody on the other side of a screen or a phone or in person or whatever that may be, it does allow you to go, oh, I'm not by myself in this, or, to form that connection, which does relieve that. Because I'm a big believer that you cannot outrun your emotions, good or bad. So if you're experiencing something, there's something in the world called dis-ease, right? Louise Hay is a big proponent of saying, if you keep something in, it causes dis-ease in your body, right? And I'm not trying to get kind of woo-woo on that, but at the same time, it's coming for you if you do not deal with it, right? And I think as a society, we tend to have voted certain emotions off the island, right? We've put some emotions are okay and others are not. Meaning the negative ones are not, and the positive ones, as long as you're happy, fulfilled, joyous, any of those kind of positive emotions, it's okay to talk about them. But the minute you say, I'm scared, I feel hurt, I'm mad, people get really uncomfortable. But the thing is that you can't have black without white, yin without yang, positive without negative. All of them have to have an equal opportunity to be voiced.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I very much relate to what you're saying. You posted something on LinkedIn recently. It was like, check on your strong friends who are not okay. And I'm not okay. For me, like 2020, I was that person. Like I am, and I think it comes along with being a woman, being an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of self-induced kind of pressures that we put on ourselves as a woman. I can only speak from my perspective. I'm sure many men feel that way as well, but and it's so true, and it's so difficult. And although I believe in these things, and it's so difficult. So if you let's say somebody who has that fear or wants to open up, like how do you start? I mean, you've mentioned just believing that maybe your story will generate some kind of positive impact, but or maybe on the flip side, maybe a better question here is, if you are a friend of a strong person, how can you maybe get that person to open up to you? Because we all know the strong people, and we're like, but we don't want to push. What is a gentle way? Is there a way? I'm just curious.
I mean, I think sometimes it's merely asking the question and not taking silence or no or being pushed away. It's especially with strong people, what I've found through my coaching and consulting and from being one is that oftentimes we are not asked. But when we are, to your point, when somebody asks me like, how are you doing? Like, no, really, I want to know. it feels really weird to me. Cause I'm like, wait, are you actually asking me? But I think it's not necessarily about evoking the reciprocation, right? Or evoking them to talk to you or something like that. It's more so being the person who walks beside them through the shit that they go through.
Yeah.
Right. So that you don't necessarily have to say, like, I'm not a big fan of saying, well, what do you need? Right.
Yeah.
Because that puts it back on the person who's under stress to be able to articulate what they need.
Right.
Instead, saying, I'm here no matter what. And then finding maybe one thing that that they need that they're not going to tell you to do, and maybe making life easier, or just mirroring how amazing they are back to them. Just giving them the support that they're giving everybody else.
Yeah, no, that's very spot on. Yeah. And because, I mean, just in my case, if I can just use myself as an example, I've almost developed an automatic answer when people are like, how are you? Oh, everything is good.
Yep. Everything's fine. Yep.
Everything is fine. When at the time, like everything is falling apart, and you couldn't tell, like I mean, maybe some people could tell, guess here and there, but I mean, like, in one of my lowest points in my life, nothing was fine. And trying to, and there's a shame associated with it. There's a big shame associated with it. It's not easy to overcome, but what helped me and might help others is I had a friend who gave me a little bit of tough love, and she said, you're going through something, but you're not telling me, and I can't be your friend, and it's offensive to me because I want to be your friend and I want to be there for you.
That's great.
And I appreciate her very much, And that approach might not work with everybody, but it worked with me. I was like, oh crap. I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. Like and again, but she kind of used my thing against me, because in my case, I didn't want to disappoint my friends. And that's what, because so she made me feel bad for making her feel bad.
Yeah. You're disappointing her. Yeah.
And then we sat and I cried and I told her everything. And, and we just basically cried together, and that was okay. And good. Yeah, so that's how I got out of that, my situation at that time, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And if we could touch upon the fact that you brought up a good point that I end up talking to people a lot about, is the fact that people nowadays, the how are you is the new hi.
Oh yeah.
Right. So you have to I've become kind of a little bit more attuned to the fact of not asking how are you if I don't have the space, if I can't hold the space for a true answer from somebody. Right. So there are people, especially when I was in the thick of it with my kids and, life was blowing up, where people would ask, how are you? And I knew they didn't want to really know. Right. Like, you can tell, because the minute I would be like, and start telling them, you could tell they were kind of cringing. Right.
Yeah.
So as humans, having the level of self-awareness to just say, you know what, I hope you're doing well. Instead of, hey, how are you? And then knowing that you can't help that person. And then on the flip side, understanding who are those few people that you can lean on, because sometimes, it's quality over quantity when it comes to that, right? It's not, I have 10 people I can tell everything to. I have 2 or 3, and that is enough, because they'll hold space for me in that. And it's okay if they can't, because they'll tell me if they can't.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to point out, and to not, if you don't have the space, don't ask, because that's where there's a joke. I don't know if it's a joke, but there's a saying like, most of the people you tell your problems to don't care. Some of them even happy you have them. So there's a very small percentage of people that actually care that you have problems and want to be there for you. And so it gives a bad rap for the rest of the people. So I think the more we can just be, honest with ourselves and saying, do I really want to, which is okay. And every relationship is different, right? Like every friend is different. There's different friendships and types and etc. And like you said, it's not everybody that you can really open up to. So I think it's valuable. Question for you, as you were going through, some of the ups and downs in your own journey, granted that you probably didn't expect these things, and you were building your resilience as you went along, and I can imagine how difficult it must have been. So was there something that you did as a routine, as a habit, as how did you manage through that difficult time? And was there anything that you picked up that you still do today to manage to build that resilience continuously?
Yeah. So I mean, my husband and I kind of made a decision really early in our journey with the kids, because again, like, it was so rapid fire that when you are in the fire of something, when you are inundated by things that are helping you build your resilience muscles, as I call them, I really do believe they are muscles and they can get stronger and help you over time. We made a conscious decision not to let it define us. Mm-hmm. Right. So number one is to not like, we're like, okay, we can let this define our children. We can let they can have this as a label. You can stay as a victim in it, or you can look at it as, okay, what am I learning from this? So on and so forth. But then also in addition, we consciously, made an effort to seek out joy throughout the crap, right? Like, because again, if you're just so mired in it and you can't see the forest through the trees, you need to actively seek something different out, which sounds like you almost can't, right? But I think if you can say to yourself, okay, let me find the joy in this day. I remember we were in a hospital and it was Thanksgiving here in the States, and my oldest was there overnight, not where you want to be when the rest of your family is gathering someplace. And, we had to really work hard to make that not feel like a crappy holiday. And we went and found like the screen in the hospital that was projecting like a parade, like we had to make a decision though, to actively seek that out. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it makes a world of difference to keep you kind of balanced and not just living there, because you pass through the resilient times, right? The challenging times. They're speed bumps, but they're not roadblocks, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that it's, when I have these conversations with people, I also realize that I'm just wondering, I don't know what's the right way to word this, but I wonder if all of us have the same capacity to experience challenges based on how we're raised. So what I'm trying to get at is, if we're going through adversity at an earlier age, does it actually equip us to be able to deal with things better versus if we had a very comfortable upbringing, comfortable in terms of just lack of adversity, lack of obstacles. Right. And I wonder if by the time we get into adulthood, because you see that happen, that there are people that fall apart when certain things happen. Yes. And then there's people that try so hard and it's a mindset difference, purely a mindset difference. And, and I just wonder, this is a question I ponder all the time, is like, is it that exposure to adversity at a younger age? And I'm curious, like, did you have adversity growing up, or, like, how did you create this mindset? Because it's like, we know these things, but it's so difficult to find that joy in the time when you're so low. Yeah. Do you see what I'm trying to get at?
No, I completely understand what you're saying. So to answer your question, I had a lot of adversity growing up, a lot. I had a lot of practice, to the point where I'll look at my husband and be like, is this seriously my effing life? Because, I think there comes a time, and it's not about being woe is me, but it is like, enough is enough. Like, is there anything else the universe wants to send my way? But I think to your point, that's something I've pondered a lot too, is I'm a big believer that, like, again, collective tool set, right? You're building it as you go. So I don't know if I hadn't been exposed to that stuff as I would have handled, some of the things that happened in my life. Like when the pandemic hit and everything shut down, our family was kind of like, another fucking thing. Like we didn't really, like it was hard, but, I think you have a different perspective on things, like, because it puts things in perspective as to what truly matters. I think depending on the adversity that you go through. But I think resilience is kind of like having a muscle. And I do believe, like, the more you build it up, the better you deal with the adversity, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. It is definitely like a muscle. And one of the biggest pushes that I always tell them, like, feel uncomfortable, even if you don't, I'm not saying like, I'm a big pusher for struggle and challenges, whether it's at the gym, whether it's with work, whether it's with writing that you hate, whatever it is, just to put yourself in a situation where you're slightly uncomfortable on a regular basis. I'm not talking about horrible things happening to me, but struggle is good. Challenges are good. The earlier we expose them, the better it is, because life is, it happens sometimes in a good way, sometimes in horrible ways. And the people, and it's about, mindset. That's it. And the mindset is about it's a muscle that you have to build. And you can't think through it. You have to experience it and to know that you're going to be okay. Again, and it can be just as much as just pushing yourself at the gym or studying something, whatever it is, right? So
but just pushing yourself out of the norm. And also, like you just hit on something. The more stuff that you go through, the more you know that there will be an end to it. Right. So there's often times when I've been like, barely getting out of bed, barely functioning, that I've had to be like, okay, Michelle, that like saying this too shall pass. This too shall pass. It may not pass how you want it to pass, and the outcome may not be how you want it, but you always maintain the power of choice, right? So you may not be able to choose the outcome or choose the situation or the circumstances, but the thing that you have is your autonomy over choosing how you view it.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking separate from like depression and things like that, where it's really unable to.
Clinical challenges, maybe they're different.
Right. But I think people forget about that. And there's been studies done when it comes to, people in concentration camps and all sorts of things around like that mindset. And I don't want to downplay that at all, because that's crazy. But, I think people forget they have a choice sometimes.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the book Man's Search for Meaning is probably one of the most mindset books you can read. It's definitely something to check out if people haven't. But it's what's interesting is that at that time when I went through my relatively simple struggle, I guess I would say, but it was still very impactful on me. I remember, I always remember my mentor's words when I started my business. My mentor said, there's going to be days where all you're going to be able to do is just put one foot in front of the other. And she said, and that's all you do. Just put one foot in front of the other. And so even at my lowest points where I would just write down my goals and aspirations. And like, I didn't even believe them sometimes. Like but I just didn't know what else to do. Like I would just affirm and write and just, just be like, I didn't believe, but eventually everything, like, what I mean? Like, that's how I got through it. Like, it's just day by day. And sometimes that's all you can do, just as you said.
Yeah. And I think normalizing the fact of what you just said, that there are going to be some days that they just suck.
Yeah.
I think there's this expectation, maybe it's in the kind of that glorification of entrepreneurship or, life itself, that if you're not smiling and happy, there's something wrong. Right? No, some days just suck, and that's okay. But if we can normalize that, then people don't feel like they're broken when they have a bad day, right? Like, or you're not as connected to your why or whatever it may be. Like, you're entitled to that just as much as you're entitled to be like jumping out of bed in the morning, as long as, again, you don't camp out there.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, because I think what separates those that kind of make it through versus those that stay in the victimhood is the fact that we need to normalize that it's okay that some days are just going to suck, and stay in it and feel it, and like, whatever, tomorrow's a new day, and maybe that's going to suck too, but the next day, and that's how you get out of it, is by looking forward and not being in that state of mind where like, oh, everything just sucks, this is my life, and because then you dig in deeper, a hole for yourself, and it's so difficult to get out of that hole. And if you don't have the right support network environment, you're going to stay in that hole. And then if you're prone to certain things, it can go down south very quickly. So
yeah. I had a girl in a speaking engagement once who asked me, and again, I had known that she wasn't speaking about depression or anything like that, but she just said, Michelle, I'm just sad. I think something's wrong. I'm just sad. And I just looked back and I said, look around. Like, I mean, we were in like the swing of pandemic, things were going wrong. I go, it's okay to be sad. Like, for some reason, somebody told us it wasn't okay, and then you feel like you're weird, or you feel like you're broken or something like that. But I just literally had to say to this poor girl, like, it's okay to be sad. Again, once you start to camp there and like set up shop there, it's a different story, but like, it's all right.
I agree. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry, as long as you manage it in a healthy way, whatever. Right. So many things. Yeah, no, I think we've just overdone it. Like in the world of like personal development and self-improvement, we've just so shoved down, everybody's throat this idea that we're supposed to be, everything has to be put together, and social media has added to it, that everything is dandy and everybody else is living this life
It's
and
not.
mine just sucks. And it's usually the opposite. And if you look at other people's problems, you're probably going to want to take all of yours back and walk away with a smile on your face and say, my life is beautiful and can carry on, So, but yeah, and I feel very much for young people, because it's easy to talk about it. In our case, I didn't grow up with access to social media. It happened a little bit later, I think in like high school or something, like later on. So it wasn't, it wasn't as impactful, but I can imagine how difficult it is for young people today. I was talking to somebody who is a cyber bully expert. So he works in the space of kind of preventing that. And he was telling me that this past year, the suicide rates between ages of 14-year-olds and 17-year-olds globally, and especially in developed countries, has skyrocketed like never before. It was never this bad in our society as it has been in this last year and in the previous couple of years as well. And I'm like, they haven't even started living their life.
Yeah.
They haven't really, what I mean? Like life hasn't, sure, people experience a lot of adversity, children and etc. But for many of them, it was really the impact of social media, and they, suicide at that age, and it's just sad, honestly.
Yeah. And I mean, and the fact that it informs your sense of self at such a vulnerable time, right? That's the time which you just described for that age window is the time when you're supposed to fuck up. You're supposed to do and mess up stuff. You're supposed to be able to express yourself in all these different ways. But, there's like this imaginary box that you also, I would imagine, feel like you need to stay in. Right? Yeah. Express yourself, but don't express yourself too much like this, that it's so out on social media, or express yourself a lot. And then that's your persona. Like, it's almost like these kids are probably trying, and again, I'm not one of them, so I can't speak for it, but trying to create a brand around themselves, which is not real life. Yikes.
It's hard. Yeah. I can't imagine what it's like to be a teen in today's age. It's So, Michelle, a couple of other questions for you. If you had a magic wand, what would you like to see happen in the world from whatever perspective you want to take it?
I have a lot. You got time. You got time.
Give me a couple. Give me a couple that really
all the isms, all of those, the racism, the sexism, the divides, that might be a very kind of pie in the sky, Pollyanna kind of thing to say, but, I would like people to just be able to see each other as humans and beyond all of those things, right? Beyond the othering. I mean, I heard that term, I can't remember when I heard it. And I was like, yeah, if we could just remove the othering from the planet, I would be all for that. But I'm not even sure that it's possible, the way that we are designed as humans. But I think, that would be my number one thing, would be othering, and then maybe level setting on the financial aspect for women and a lot of things around women.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you as an entrepreneur, is there anything that you do on a daily basis to keep yourself kind of learning and growing, and again, building that resilience? Is there anything that you implement as your daily routines?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of habits for success. So I tend to have what I call is bookends. So every day, and it may not be right when I wake up because I have kids and life gets crazy, but at some point before I start my work day, there's, I make sure I do a little bit of reading. I make sure I meditate. I make sure, my day is organized, that I go into the day with a good headspace. And then on the opposite side of that, I bookend the day with at night, I'm looking back throughout the day going, okay, what am I grateful for? What went wrong? So I don't go to bed with, not every day, because that's impossible, with the 15 million things in my head, so I make sure that I'm bookending, and I can tell, if I don't start my day off correctly, it's not going to be good. It's not gonna be pretty. Right. And it doesn't have to be 2 hours worth of it. I'm talking I get all this done in 20 to 30 minutes.
Right. Yeah. No, that's very good. I use a 5-minute journal. I have it here, and that keeps me on track. Last year, It's for those that are not familiar, 5-minute journal. I ask you to kind of what you're grateful for, what would make today great, and then your affirmations, and then you review at the end of the day. Last year, I used the Stoic journal, which was really
Nice.
thought-provoking because it just asks you questions. You're like, what? Like every day it asks you questions that you're like, I don't even know what that means. Like, and you have to sit there and ponder.
Thought about it. Yeah.
You have to think about it. And that's what I've noticed as a trend for entrepreneurs, and yourself included. It's taking time to think about, taking time to think what you're grateful for, what went right, getting those thoughts out of your mind and into a piece of paper, or I don't know, a recording or whatever it may be. And it's, I ask this question to all my guests, and there are trends that come out, themes, and one part is it's never this magic formula. It's not like there's this magic thing that people do. It's usually back to basics, like self-talk, sleep,
eating, water,
water. Do you know what I mean? Like talking with friends, environment. It's very basic. And I think that, and I always, tell people, like, start that. Like if you feel unsettled, unhappy, stressed, overwhelmed, whatever it is, start with the basics, because that's usually where it's at. And we have to be mindful that a lot of things that are out there, it's marketing, it's business, it's psychologists pushing marketing agendas on you. So you don't need all those things. You just go back to basics. Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, folks. Like if your bottom level of that pyramid, if you don't know what that is, please go Google it. Yeah. If the bottom level of that pyramid isn't met, like, it's like dealing with a toddler when they freak out. Like, are they hungry? Are they tired? Because adults aren't much different. And, that and what you just described also allows you to remember you have a choice and to live intentionally. Because some of us just go on autopilot throughout our lives and we never stop to think, is this still what I want? Or is this the life that I want to architect for myself? We never even ask those questions. So bravo on that journal. Number one, it sounds fantastic. And it's a matter of leaving the white space so that you can remember that you have a choice.
That's beautiful. And I think that is the best way to end this podcast, because that is the question I want people to ponder. I don't want to ask you anything else.
Agreed.
Well, except maybe just where can people follow you?
Yes.
Why not?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me at michellemercier.com. That's my website. You'll find all the social handles and all that stuff on there too. You can also listen to my podcast, which is The Resilient Entrepreneur. I'm on all the typical platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere podcasts are. So that's where you can find me.
And I'm going to share all those links in the description. So check it out, guys. And Michelle, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you for the podcast. I'm definitely going to be sharing it, because I think more people need to hear other people's stories and not feel so alone.
Yeah, thank you.